Welcome back to Rural Justice, where we uncover the most outrageous stories of property disputes, boundary wars, and small-town corruption. I'm your host, Mike, and today's story is absolutely wild. It's about a power-hungry city councilwoman who thought she could illegally seize private property until she literally walked into a federal investigation that brought down an entire corruption network. She kicked down my door screaming about illegal structures and code violations. But what she didn't know was that my rustic little cabin was actually the site of a top-secret Attorney General Task Force meeting about municipal corruption. Talk about perfect timing. Let me introduce you to the cast of characters in this incredible tale that unfolded in the mountains of northern Montana, where federal justice met small-town tyranny head-on. I'm Thomas Tom Bradley, a 45-year-old former federal investigator turned private security consultant. After 20 years working organized crime cases for the FBI, I retired to a remote 40-acre property in the Bitterroot Mountains where I built a modest off-grid cabin. The property is completely self-sufficient. Solar power, well water, septic system, and enough isolation that I can go weeks without seeing another human being. It's exactly the kind of place where a burnt-out Fed can decompress and maybe write a book about all the corruption I've witnessed over the years. My cabin looks rustic from the outside, deliberately so. It's designed to appear like a simple hunting lodge, complete with weathered wood siding and a stone chimney. But inside, it's equipped with military-grade communications equipment, secure internet connections, and enough electronics to run a small intelligence operation. This setup has made it the perfect location for hosting sensitive meetings with other law enforcement professionals who need to discuss cases away from potentially compromised offices. Then there's Karen Whitfield, the 51-year-old city councilwoman who single-handedly turned the tiny mountain town of Pine Ridge into her personal fiefdom. Karen moved to Montana 5 years ago from California, claiming she wanted to escape the bureaucratic nightmare of big city politics. What she really wanted was to find a place small enough that she could control it completely. Pine Ridge has a population of just 847 people, and Karen managed to get herself elected to the city council by promising to bring professional standards and accountability to local government. What she actually brought was a reign of terror that would have made corrupt Chicago aldermen proud. She appointed herself to every possible committee, created new regulations that gave her unprecedented power over private property, and systematically drove out anyone who opposed her agenda. Her inner circle included Mayor Bob Hutchinson, a weak-willed former insurance agent who rubber-stamped whatever Karen wanted. Building Inspector Dale Morrison, no relation to me, a failed contractor who used his position to shake down property owners for bribes. Police Chief Randy Stevens, who treated the Pine Ridge PD like his personal security force, and most importantly, Judge Patricia Miles, who had been taking kickbacks to rule in favor of the city's property seizure cases. The supporting players were equally corrupt. City Attorney Michael Torres, who drafted illegal ordinances designed to circumvent property rights. Assessor Linda Park, who artificially inflated property values to justify higher seizure settlements. And County Commissioner Jerry Walsh, who provided political cover for the entire operation from his position in the county government. When I first bought my property 3 years ago, Pine Ridge seemed like a sleepy mountain town that minded its own business. The previous owner had been a retired rancher who lived on the property for 30 years without any government interference. My nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and the cabin was so remote that most people didn't even know it existed. The property came with a clean title, proper well permits, and a septic system that had been legally installed decades earlier. Everything was completely above board, and I had specifically chosen this location because it was outside Pine Ridge city limits and therefore subject only to minimal county regulations. For the first 2 years, I lived in peaceful isolation, consulting on security projects and enjoying the quiet mountain life. I occasionally hosted former colleagues for fishing trips or informal discussions about ongoing cases, but nothing that would attract attention or disturb the neighbors. That changed when Karen Whitfield discovered that my property contained valuable mineral rights and a strategic location that she wanted for a luxury resort development project. She had been working with a California investment group that planned to build a high-end wilderness retreat, and my 40 acres sat right in the middle of their proposed site. The first sign of trouble came when I received a letter from the city claiming that my cabin was an unpermitted structure that violated recently enacted building codes. This was obviously ridiculous. My property wasn't even within city limits, and the cabin had been built with proper permits years before the new codes existed. When I called the city to clarify the situation, I was told that Pine Ridge had recently adjusted its city boundaries to include previously rural properties, and that all structures within the new boundaries needed to comply with updated building standards. The letter was signed by Karen herself, in her capacity as chairman of the Municipal Development Committee. I researched the boundary changes and discovered they were completely illegal. Cities can't simply expand their boundaries without following specific legal procedures, including property owner notification and formal hearings. Karen had apparently just drawn new lines on a map and started enforcing city regulations in areas where she had no authority. But she was just getting started. Over the next few months, I received citations for unpermitted electrical systems, my solar panels, inadequate sewage disposal, my legally installed septic system, illegal water extraction, my permitted well, and unauthorized land use, living on my own property. Each citation came with massive fines and demands that I appear before various city committees to discuss compliance options. When I tried to fight the citations through normal legal channels, I discovered that the entire local system was rigged. Judge Miles rubber-stamped every city violation. City Attorney Torres filed frivolous lawsuits to rack up legal fees, and Building Inspector Morrison kept finding new violations every time I fixed the previous ones. The breaking point came when Karen issued an emergency condemnation order declaring my cabin a public safety hazard that needed to be demolished immediately. The order was based on a bogus inspection report claiming that my structure was structurally unsound and environmentally dangerous. I knew this was complete nonsense. I had built the cabin myself using techniques learned from 20 years of investigating construction fraud. Every system was engineered to exceed code requirements, and I had documentation proving that everything was legally installed and properly maintained. But Karen had apparently decided that legal niceties didn't apply to her crusade to seize my property. She scheduled the demolition for the following week and hired a contractor who specialized in emergency property remediation. Basically a wrecking crew that asked no questions and left no evidence. That's when I decided to fight back, but not in the way Karen expected. Instead of hiring lawyers and filing appeals that would disappear into her rigged legal system, I decided to use my federal law enforcement background to investigate the corruption that was obviously driving this property grab. What I discovered was far worse than simple municipal overreach. Karen and her associates had been running a systematic property seizure scheme that defrauded dozens of rural landowners out of millions of dollars in real estate. They would illegally expand city boundaries, cite properties for bogus violations, impose crushing fines and legal fees, then force owners to sell at below-market prices to avoid total financial ruin. The scheme was particularly effective against elderly or isolated property owners who couldn't afford legal representation or didn't understand their rights. Karen's group had seized over 200 acres of prime mountain real estate through this process, then sold it to developers for enormous profits that were split between the conspirators. But they had made a crucial mistake by targeting me. As a former federal investigator, I understood exactly how to document criminal enterprises and build prosecutable cases. More importantly, I still had contacts throughout the federal law enforcement community who could act on evidence of municipal corruption. I spent 3 months building an airtight case against Karen's operation. I documented every illegal boundary change, every fraudulent citation, every rigged legal proceeding, and every suspicious financial transaction. I traced the money flows that connected the property seizures to offshore accounts controlled by Karen's investment partners. Most damaging of all, I had recorded conversations with several victims who described identical patterns of harassment, illegal citations, and forced property sales. The evidence showed a clear criminal conspiracy that violated multiple federal laws, including mail fraud, wire fraud, extortion, and civil rights violations. When I had enough evidence to support federal charges, I reached out to my former colleagues at the FBI and the Attorney General's office. They were very interested in the case, particularly because it represented a new model of municipal corruption that was being replicated in small towns across the country. That's when Assistant Attorney General Rachel Morrison, again, no relation, decided to form a task force to investigate municipal corruption in rural communities. My case against Karen's operation became the centerpiece of a broader investigation into similar schemes in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. The task force needed a secure location for their initial planning meeting, somewhere away from potentially compromised government offices and curious local officials. My remote cabin was perfect, completely private, equipped with secure communications, and unknown to the targets of the investigation. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late September. Assistant Attorney General Morrison would be attending, along with FBI Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, IRS Criminal Investigation Division Chief Paul Rodriguez, and Montana State Attorney General David Kim. They were flying in from Washington, D.C. and would be using my cabin as their operational headquarters for 3 days while they planned the coordinated takedown of multiple corruption networks. I had spent weeks preparing for the meeting, installing additional security measures and setting up secure conference facilities. The cabin might look rustic from the outside, but inside it was equipped with everything needed for a high-level federal law enforcement operation. On the morning of the meeting, I was making final preparations when I heard vehicles approaching on my private road. I assumed it was the federal team arriving early, but when I looked out the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Karen Whitfield was leading a convoy of city vehicles toward my cabin. She had brought Building Inspector Morrison, Police Chief Stevens, and several other city officials, along with a demolition crew and what appeared to be a news reporter with a camera crew. I quickly called Assistant Attorney General Morrison, who was about 15 minutes away. "You need to know that we're about to have unexpected visitors," I told her. "The main target of your investigation is literally driving up to my cabin right now with a demolition crew. Can you delay them until we arrive?" she asked. "I'll do my best, but they seem pretty determined." What happened next was like something out of a comedy movie, if comedies featured federal law enforcement operations and municipal corruption. Karen jumped out of her SUV and marched toward my front door with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. She was wearing a bright yellow city official vest and carrying a clipboard full of official-looking documents. "Thomas Bradley," she shouted, pounding on my door. "By order of the Pine Ridge City Council, this structure is condemned and scheduled for immediate demolition. You have 10 minutes to remove any personal belongings before we bring in the equipment." I opened the door and stepped onto my porch, trying to buy time until the federal team arrived. "Good morning, Karen. I think there might be some confusion here. This property isn't within Pine Ridge city limits, and you don't have authority to condemn anything on my land." She waved her clipboard aggressively. The city boundaries were legally expanded 6 months ago. Every structure in this area now falls under municipal jurisdiction, and your cabin represents a serious public safety hazard. "I'd like to see the legal documentation for those boundary changes," I said calmly. "You'll have plenty of time to review paperwork after we remove this eyesore," she replied. "Dale, start setting up the equipment. Randy, make sure he doesn't interfere with the demolition crew." Police Chief Stevens stepped forward with his hand resting on his sidearm. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the structure and allow city personnel to do their job." That's when I heard the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching from the south. Karen and her crew looked confused as 2 black helicopters appeared over the tree line and began circling my property. "Tom!" Karen screamed over the noise. "What the hell is going on here?" "I think you're about to find out," I replied, pointing toward the road where a convoy of black SUVs was approaching fast. The helicopters landed in my front yard, disgorging a team of federal agents in tactical gear. Simultaneously, the SUVs arrived and more agents poured out, surrounding Karen's demolition crew with military precision. Assistant Attorney General Morrison stepped out of the lead SUV, straightening her suit jacket and looking remarkably composed for someone who had just arrived at what appeared to be a standoff between local officials and federal agents. "Good morning," she said pleasantly, approaching Karen. "I'm Rachel Morrison, Assistant Attorney General for the United States. I believe you're Karen Whitfield, Pine Ridge City Councilwoman." Karen's face had gone completely white. We're here on official city business. This property has been condemned for public safety violations." "Ms. Whitfield," Morrison replied, "I have some documents I'd like you to see." She pulled out a folder and handed Karen several papers. "These are federal search warrants for Pine Ridge City Hall, your personal residence, and various financial institutions. You're under investigation for conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and civil rights violations." The demolition crew had quietly backed away from their equipment and were trying to blend into the background. Building Inspector Morrison looked like he was about to faint. Police Chief Stevens had very carefully moved his hand away from his weapon. "There's been some mistake," Karen stammered. "We're just enforcing legitimate building codes." "Actually," Morrison said, "there's been no mistake. We've been investigating your property seizure operation for months. Mr. Bradley here is a former federal investigator who's been assisting with our case." Karen turned to stare at me with an expression of pure horror. You're working with them." "I'm a concerned citizen who reported criminal activity to the appropriate authorities. I replied. Though I have to admit, I didn't expect you to walk directly into our operational planning meeting. FBI Special Agent Walsh had been quietly photographing all the city vehicles and personnel. Ms. Whitfield, we're going to need to speak with you and your associates about your activities in Pine Ridge. You have the right to remain silent. As Agent Walsh began reading Miranda rights to the increasingly panicked city officials, Assistant Attorney General Morrison pulled me aside. Tom, this is absolutely perfect, she said quietly. We couldn't have choreographed a better demonstration of their overreach and illegal tactics. The fact that they attempted to demolish your property while we were literally here to discuss their crimes is going to make our case ironclad. The news reporter who had accompanied Karen's demolition crew was frantically filming everything, clearly realizing that he had stumbled into a much bigger story than a simple building code dispute. The footage would later become crucial evidence in the federal prosecution. Over the next several hours, my cabin became the operational center for the largest municipal corruption investigation in Montana history. While FBI agents secured evidence from the city vehicles and interviewed the demolition crew, the Attorney General's task force used my secure communications equipment to coordinate simultaneous raids on Pine Ridge City Hall, Judge Miles Courthouse, and the personal residences of all the conspirators. The raids uncovered evidence that exceeded even my worst suspicions about the scope of the corruption. Karen's operation had stolen over $15 million in property through illegal seizures, with the profits being split between the conspirators and their outside investment partners. Bank records showed that Karen personally received over $2 million through various shell companies connected to the seized properties. Judge Miles had taken $500,000 in bribes to rubber stamp the illegal proceedings. Even Mayor Hutchinson, who had seemed like a weak figurehead, had received $300,000 for his cooperation. But the most shocking discovery was that the scheme extended far beyond Pine Ridge. Karen was part of a national network of corrupt municipal officials who were sharing strategies and resources to defraud rural property owners across multiple states. The Attorney General's investigation eventually uncovered similar operations in over 40 small towns. The conspiracy began to unravel immediately. Building Inspector Morrison confessed within hours, providing detailed information about the fraudulent inspection reports and illegal citation processes. Police Chief Stevens admitted to intimidating property owners and suppressing complaints about the city's activities. Judge Miles tried to claim that she had simply been following legal precedent, but the financial records clearly showed the connection between her favorable rulings and the payment she received from Karen's shell companies. Karen herself maintained her innocence for exactly 3 days, until FBI agents presented her with recorded phone calls discussing plans to eliminate the Bradley problem permanently. The recordings revealed that she had been planning not just to demolish my cabin, but to file false criminal charges that would force me to leave Montana entirely. The trial was a sensation that drew national media attention to the problem of municipal corruption in small towns. Karen and her co-conspirators were convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to substantial prison terms. Karen received 15 years for conspiracy and fraud, while her associates received sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years. More importantly, the convictions led to comprehensive reforms of Montana's municipal governance laws. New regulations now require strict oversight of boundary changes, independent review of building code enforcement, and whistleblower protections for citizens who report municipal corruption. The civil lawsuits were equally satisfying. Over 60 property owners joined a class action suit that recovered millions in damages from the city's insurance policies and the personal assets of the conspirators. Many families who had lost their homes and land were able to buy back their properties and rebuild their lives. My own property was completely cleared of all bogus violations, and the city was forced to pay substantial damages for the harassment and illegal citation campaign. I used the settlement money to establish a foundation that provides legal assistance to rural property owners facing similar municipal overreach. The cabin that Karen had tried to demolish became something of a legend in federal law enforcement circles. The story of how a corrupt city councilwoman literally walked into an attorney general's meeting while attempting to illegally seize property was told and retold in training seminars across the country. Assistant Attorney General Morrison used the case as the foundation for a comprehensive federal program targeting municipal corruption in small towns. The Pine Ridge investigation became the model for similar operations that have since exposed corruption networks in hundreds of rural communities. Karen Whitfield is currently serving her sentence at a federal prison in California. According to recent reports, she spends her time working in the prison library and has developed an expertise in property law, though from a very different perspective than she once held. The town of Pine Ridge has slowly recovered from the corruption scandal, New city leadership has focused on transparent governance and economic development that benefits long-time residents rather than outside investors. Property values have stabilized, and many families who were forced to leave during Karen's reign of terror have returned to rebuild their community. My cabin remains exactly where it belongs, on my legally owned property, built to proper standards, and serving as a reminder that sometimes justice comes to those who are patient enough to document crimes and professional enough to present evidence to the right authorities. The lesson here isn't just about fighting municipal corruption or defending property rights. It's about the importance of preparation, documentation, and knowing when to escalate beyond local systems that have been compromised. Karen thought she could intimidate a rural property owner with illegal tactics and fraudulent authority, but she made the mistake of targeting someone who understood how to build federal cases against organized crime. The most satisfying aspect isn't the prison sentences or the financial judgments, though both were well deserved. It's the knowledge that dozens of other property owners were saved from similar victimization, and that a nationwide corruption network was dismantled through careful investigation and professional law enforcement work. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting evidence. In this case, the evidence walked right through my front door and introduced itself to a federal task force that was specifically formed to investigate its crimes. You couldn't script timing that perfect, but sometimes reality provides better dramatic irony than any fiction writer could imagine. The remote mountain cabin that was supposed to be demolished for public safety reasons is now a secure facility where federal agents occasionally gather to plan operations against municipal corruption. Karen wanted to tear down my home to make room for luxury development, but instead she built a federal case that sent her to prison and protected property rights for rural communities across the country. Justice may be blind, but it's not deaf, and it definitely knows the difference between legal authority and criminal conspiracy, even when that conspiracy comes dressed in official city vests and backed by fraudulent court orders. That's today's episode of Rural Justice. If you enjoyed watching corrupt officials walk straight into federal investigations, smash that subscribe button and tell us about your own encounters with municipal overreach in the comments. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best offense is a really good offense, especially when your offense includes assistant attorneys general and federal search warrants.